Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Florida City and County Management Association's webinar entitled Manager Board Relations. My name is Bob Lee, and I have the pleasure to serve as your host today. Joining me as co-hosts are Dr. Dina Hurst and Mr. Mike Ryko. Both Dina and Mike work with the John Scott Daly Florida Institute of Government. They are the people today who will be interacting most with today's attendees to cover any questions you may have, notably involving technology issues, and also address other questions that are not posed for the presenters. And we do encourage you, by the way, to make sure you submit your questions, which I'll be going over in just a moment on how to do that, to today's presenters. Sponsors for today's webinar include the Florida League of Cities, the John Scott Daly Florida Institute of Government, the Center for Florida Local Government Excellence, and corporate sponsors, Government Services Group, Strategic Government Resources, and Granicus. Collectively, these sponsors enable FCCMA to put these webinars on at no cost to attendees. We also archive these webinars. If you go to cflge.org, that's cflge.org, you can review these on demand subsequent to the actual live webinar. I referenced just a few minutes ago about a feature in order for you to submit questions to today's presenters. And I want to refer you now to the control panel, specifically where it says chat. In the chat box, you'll be able to write your question, send that in just by hitting the little arrow sign next to send, and we'll get those questions answered to you today. We generally try to get every one of them answered. So your questions are the priority. We do have a few that we've prepared for today's presenters, but your questions will be the priority. So please send in those questions that you may have as we go along. At this time, it's my honor to introduce two distinguished gentlemen here in Florida, Alan Cohen, the Assistant County Administrator in Broward County, and Robert Bobby Green, a recently retired City Manager in the City of Auburndale. Alan, Bobby, welcome. And before you and I begin this Q&A session, I would like you each to summarize your backgrounds, because the two of you have something unique, I would suggest, that most people who are in the management profession do not have in terms of their backgrounds. So why don't we start with you first, Alan? I think you're muted, Alan.
I was going to say age before beauty, let Bobby go. All right. Well, hello, everybody. And it's an honor and a privilege to be here today, particularly with my two esteemed colleagues. Welcome to everyone who has signed up for this webinar. My background's a little atypical. I've spent considerable number of years in the private sector before coming over to public service. I was an elected official, the mayor of Ithaca, New York. I served 8 years in that role, then eventually moved down here to our sunny state, served as the city manager of Sunny Isles Beach and city manager of Sunrise before joining the Broward County staff about 6 years ago. Back to you, Bobby.
Thank you, Alan. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for the invite to join you this afternoon. I also, a former elected official, 1980 to 1986, served on the Auburndale City Commission, and then 3 years, 1983, 84, and 86, as mayor of the city of Auburndale, before going back to school, finish up school, get my master's degree there at USF. And then in 1991 was hired as the city manager here in Auburndale, and just recently retired after 30 years. So Bob, you've got two public administrators, but also two former elected officials.
And I think the topic, obviously, that we have today is perfect. to have you two present, because you've been on both sides of this issue, both as elected officials, of course, and appointed officials. So I think you bring a perspective that a lot of us do not have who have spent time in the profession. So looking forward to your insight in a couple of these questions that we have for you. Why don't we go ahead and get started with the first question. And if we could put that up on the screen. And I'm going to give this to you, Bobby, to lead us off. And then, Alan, I'm going to ask you for your perspective. For those who may not, by the way, be able to see this presentation today, but have dialed in, I'm going to go ahead and read the question, make sure you all know what these two gentlemen are talking about. The question is, what advice can you give to a manager or an assistant manager who is starting a new job in terms of building a relationship with the elected board? Again, the emphasis here is a manager or assistant manager coming in who is starting a new job. Bobby?
Most certainly, you hope that the manager or the assistant manager coming into the job, now a manager, has that complete and full understanding of the line between council manager and the elected officials. Is so important. It's actually probably the most important part of the job is to know your job as it relates to your boss's job. And in this case, you've got a new person coming into the job. You've interviewed. You've been hired to be the manager. Your elected officials probably know more about you now than you know about them. So my advice would be to do your homework. You've done some to get the job, congratulations, but now take a one-on-one opportunity to get to know those elected officials, interview them, find out why they ran for office, what got them interested in city government. You may find that someone was upset with utility rates, or maybe they were upset with the conditions of the parks. And as they have those opportunities to tell you why they ran, you've got an opportunity now to know more about them, how long they've been in the community. And you've also been given some tidbits to where in budget time and as you do your job, you may want to be mindful of those things such as the utility rates and the conditions of the parks and those interests that you find of the elected officials. It's all about building trust and respect.
Thanks, Bobby. Alan?
That's a great start, Bobby. Thank you. Let me dovetail off of your remarks about, first of all, doing homework. If you've done your homework during the search process and you have not only read a lot, but you've either watched or listened to meetings, you'll have a better understanding of the dynamics that exist on the elected body and the issues that are important to the individuals of that body. The one-on-one meetings that Bobby talked about are critically important. And not only will you get a better understanding of their priorities, but you can also start developing a better sense of their communication style and work style. And it's going to differ for each member of the elected body. And that will help you to better communicate both on an individual level and on a group level by understanding how best to communicate with each individual. Once you have those initial one-on-one meetings, I like to have ongoing one-on-one meetings. A lot of us do that already for agenda review. I try and include extra time in the meeting. Doesn't always work, of course, depending on the agenda, so that you can cover non-agenda related items and keep tabs or keep in touch with your individual electeds about ongoing concerns that they have or new concerns that have arisen. And I think Bobby and I can both attest to this, understand that the members of your elected body are politicians first. And they have a disparate number of reasons why they ran for office, as Bobby kind of talked about earlier. But you know, what's important to an elected official is different than what's important to a politician who are occupying the same body. Okay, but they're already thinking about that next election, whether it gets re-election to the body, moving up within that organization, or moving on to higher office. If you're aware of their role as a politician, one of the very important things is to understand their commitment to their constituents, and you have to not only understand the importance of constituent relations, but you have to be responsive. So when questions come to you, you have to know that someone's waiting on the other end for an answer. And the quicker you get back to your elected, the better they're going to look to their constituents. I'll throw in a couple other little tidbits. I try when possible to give credit to the elected officials for ideas that I have, because I'm not a policymaker, they are. And I might have policy ideas, but you know, if they like it and they want to run with it, it's now their idea, and I wash my hands of it. So part of our job is making them look good. If I don't agree with a policy direction, I try whenever possible to limit my opposition to behind the scenes. There are times as managers, based on our ICMA, code, that we're compelled to give voice to concerns that we have. But when we're not compelled in that regard, I think it's better that you share your concerns and your opposition privately, because you're not publicly putting your electeds, in what could be a bad position. Bottom line, be transparent, be reasonably accessible, and be humble. Those are all things that will be appreciated, and we can talk about reasonable access as this session goes on. I thought this was the meatiest of the questions, and that's why I rambled a bit. Bobby, you look like you want to jump in.
Alan, it was funny as to where, you get your job on the manager side by your professional development, by your education, by your master's degree. And you got to think about how crazy it is to stand on a street corner with a sandwich board, asking people to vote for you. And it's, but you come from different angles, and you've got to find that happy medium. And the best way to do that is get to know each other.
Hear, hear.
Good advice. Alan, I would like to follow up on just one question that I had listening to you when you were talking about elected officials versus politicians, if I heard that correctly.
You did.
Did you have a distinction between the two? And would you mind just sharing just a little bit more about that distinction between a politician and an elected official?
Well, a politician is essentially a political animal, someone who's running for office, and their focus is on the political side of whatever it is that they're doing. The elected official is just that. They're an official within the government, elected by the people, and they're there to do the people's work. The two usually work together well, not always. And sometimes you'll see decisions from an elected official that really represent more the political side than what you know to be their good intent. And I distinguish between those two because it helps to remind me that they're torn as individuals in, wanting to pursue a certain path, but not always being able to do so because of political considerations.
Thanks, Alan. Why don't we go ahead and move to the next slide? And with our second question, and Alan, I'm going to have you continue speaking. And the question is, the mayor's role with the manager's role with the mayor is unique. What advice can you give to your colleagues regarding how to balance the mayor's needs with other members of the board? And by the way, some jurisdictions we understand do not have mayors, but they do have chairmen of the boards. And there may be some distinction there as well that as part of your answers you two could weigh in on. But what, Alan, do you see the role with the mayor, how that's a bit unique, and how do you balance that with the other board members?
Well, the mayor's role is unique, and it's typically defined in your charter. So it's incumbent upon you to become familiar with the charter. It's also, again, if you did your homework in securing the position, you'll have at least some sense of this dynamic as well. How the mayor is viewed by their colleagues and how they interact during the legislative process. I think it's something, I mean, I have actually asked about it during the search process or the interview process. Funny enough, my first city manager job, it was brought to me. I had city commissioners who were very unhappy that they felt relegated to second place by a very, very strong mayor. And they wanted to make sure that I was the right person to help bring more balance to that equation. And didn't go exactly as anybody had planned, but it taught me the importance of at least learning more about how they perceive those dynamics. I think with the mayor, him or herself, you acknowledge their unique role, but you also have to be upfront in making it clear that you're responsible to the entire elected body. And that's particularly important when it comes to information sharing. From my experience, nothing pisses off an elected official more when you share information with one of them and don't share it with the others. You might need to meet more frequently with the mayor than you might with the other members, again, depending on how their role is structured within the organization. I'll shut up, Bobby, and let you add to that.
Alan, real quick, as to where both of us having served as mayor, I can attest that I got far more phone calls when I was mayor than I ever did as city manager. And, if you know that going into it, there's no question that it is a unique relationship. I got hired on a 4-1 vote and did not have the trust or respect of the negative vote for my hire. We've had the opportunity over the years to work with mayors through almost like a revolving door. They would rotate each year, and I'd have a different mayor almost every other year, if not every year, elected by the citizenry. And then also too, that was changed years later to where the commission would elect that mayor amongst themselves and ended up with a long tenured mayor. So I've seen both. Coming back to the 4-1 vote though, when that commissioner got their opportunity to serve as mayor in his last term, as he was exiting the commission, he made a public comment that he did not know the true job responsibilities of the manager until he was elected as mayor. He got to see firsthand because there is more contact, there is more engagement with that mayor. And it took that to win over that commissioner. However, it was as he was exiting the door. So, but it is speaks to the point that you do have that more engagement with the mayor than you do your elected officials. Alan, I think you're spot on as far as balancing that, sharing of information and the like. You might have to find yourself stroking an ego a little more with that mayor who may very well be that politician versus the elected official that you speak of. But all in all, find out what that mayor wants, and what he or she wants is what you need to deliver, and just make sure you don't get out front of that mayor.
Bobby, your anecdote about the number of phone calls between being a mayor and a manager reminds me of a quick story. When I was mayor, I had someone knock on my door 7 a.m. Sunday morning to tell me that this person who lived in a neighborhood miles away, okay, had a car blocking their driveway. Now, they didn't call the police. They decided to come over to my house to tell me. What that that little story speaks to is the general public has expectations, sometimes highly unrealistic expectations of their elected officials, particularly the mayor, because the mayor is seen in this role of being able to get things done. And the general public doesn't necessarily understand the nuances of a manager, council form of government and who's really the CEO and effectuates the actions necessary to accomplish what that particular constituent would like to see. They don't necessarily even have to, as long as, again, we make our electeds look good. But it's really important for us to recognize the expectations placed on these individuals that we're working with and do our best to try and help them meet those expectations.
And also you get to a point to where, you know, we speak of the younger person today knowing very little about local government and even less about what a local government manager does. That also describes some of our elected officials coming in the door as a candidate. They know very little of local government. They know very little about what a local government manager does. So we're having to put on that coach's hat, the educator hat, to kind of bring them up to fold. One of the things that we talked about early amongst ourselves was when you have those candidates qualifying for office who know very little about what local government does. One of the things that we've done here is to where I'll include them in those agenda packets. Put the agenda packets together for the new candidates that are qualifying for your job, for the job of an elected official, your boss, and hand deliver it. Take it to them. Let them be introduced to local government by you. If not you, who better? And then also give them the opportunity to ask questions. I always suggest to candidates that are running for office to, you know, if you're out there and you see something, or if a voter that you're trying to get to vote for you brings up some concern or complaint, bring it back to me. Let me see what we can do to help that person out. Maybe they haven't even bothered to call. It's very important, but it comes back to that role. The mayor is the point person. They know there's a mayor somewhere. They may even think you as the manager are the mayor. And I know that's happened here before.
Bobby, I actually have a question for you. I love this idea of hand delivering agendas, you know, during that election season process when you know someone's running. How do you handle, is there any communication between you? Let's say they're running against an incumbent that you're working with now. Do you let the incumbent know up front that my policy is when anyone's a prospective member, I reach out like this?
I've never had that come up, and it's to where, you know, we may have 4 or 5 running against one of the incumbents, and I've just always we've had several run that, you know, that never come to a commission meeting. And so when they see you at the house with the commission packet, you hope they're suggesting to their spouse or significant other or someone, you'll never guess what happened. The manager came by and brought me a packet. They have a meeting Monday night at 7 o'clock. Didn't even know what time the meetings were, you know. And so, but that is a good point as to where even if, because you post your agendas online and the like, they could get it anyway. But it may very well be just another step in communications that you just tell all of your elected officials all at one time. Qualifying is ended. They'll all be given packets and invited to attend our next meeting.
There you go.
We have a question that's come in, and you're actually addressing the question, and I think you're covering some of the other material that may be on a couple of our assigned questions, but that's perfectly fine. I like winging it, just like we're doing it. You guys are doing a great job, and let's keep doing that. But the question is, again, I want to pose the question, although you're addressing parts of it already, and it is as follows. What best practices work for you in making sure that none of the elected perceive you as playing favoritism? And either one of you, go ahead, address that.
Bobby?
One of the, you know, if there's a mistake that can be made, and and I have seen this, and I know we all have, is to where, you'll see maybe you have more friends on the commission in the majority versus some of the other two. And here you're feeling comfortable over there at the dinner or in the park, standing there with the ones you feel comfortable with. And at the same time, you have others that are feeling left out. It is most important. I remember at one of our local league sponsored activities, Bob Lee was there as our moderator, and I got the opportunity to introduce our elected officials. And I started out by suggesting, let me introduce my favorite commissioner. And Dr. Lee's mouth just dropped. And as soon as I was finishing introducing that one, I turned around and I said, and also my favorite commissioner, and my favorite commissioner, and my favorite commissioner, because they're all your favorite. And if you find yourself going outside of that, you may be finding yourself looking for another job, because it doesn't take long. We all know how to count votes, but they're all your favorite commissioners.
I'll tell you, if I may jump in, Bobby, I think what was particularly important about that was the humor that was brought with it. They all got the message. People understood it, but it was, I don't like to overuse this phrase. I think it's overly used, but it really was a good teaching moment for the people in that crowd to understand that relationship, that they're all favorite people. And I think that was a really good way of making that point to not just the elected officials, but everyone else who was present.
Absolutely. Bob, I'll tell you in response to the submitted question, I've actually been burned in regard to information sharing early on, and I learned pretty quickly the importance of always sharing with everybody whenever necessary. So whenever I have a one-on-one conversation, I find myself more circumspect sometimes than I might otherwise be, to make sure that I'm not sharing information that is not that I'm not going to share with everybody else. Standard procedure: if I share a document, then I write a memo and I send it out to the others, and I say, one of your colleagues requested this, I'm sharing it with all of you so you have the same information. And simple practices like that will make it less likely that you'll be accused of favoritism.
Bobby and Alan, and we'll move on here, but what you've talked about sort of begs the question: what if you have an elected official, whether it's you're the new manager and you're just trying to introduce yourself to the new elected officials, or you're a seasoned manager and a new elected official comes in, and that particular elected official, neither one of those scenarios, just doesn't want to meet with you, just for some reason comes across very negative towards you and the administration, almost anti-government. They see themselves as a watchdog. They don't see themselves as part of the government. They see themselves as a watchdog looking over you and maybe the other elected officials, a rogue politician, if you will. Have either of you run into a situation like that? And how do you deal with a person like that when you're trying to, not show favoritism, make sure they get the information that they need to have, et cetera? Have you run into a situation like that?
Yield to Alan.
Not to the extreme extent that you're citing, Bob. I've seen it elsewhere, but I've been fortunate not to have experienced that extreme. But I have had situations where electeds did not want to meet with me or meet with me on a regular basis. Sometimes electeds are told that if you schedule a regular meeting with your manager, then you're ceding power somehow, which is ridiculous. And I had to work around that and just schedule meetings as we could make them, which was difficult. In this case, the person was the mayor, and he was busy and I was busy, and it was tough to schedule. But you just have to work around that. Bobby, I'm going to throw this one at you.
I think that, you know, we make that comment about you have to build trust and respect. And Dr. Lee, if I hear your question, basically the person's coming in with a complete distrust of government and you. You've got to work hard at that. It's almost as if you take that challenging commissioner and you throw everything at it, you have probably had the others a long time ago in your camp, and you've satisfied their challenges. But it's a task, and you know, you could call, you can suggest. Here again, getting to know why they have that distrust. It may take a year or two into their term to get that door open. But it also may be as to where it's the citizenry that pushes them through that door, you know, on a particular issue, or they see that you actually handled that situation as professional as you could. And it was like, boy, are we glad to have you there as our manager. And then all of a sudden that comment or compliment comes your way and you go, where did that come from? But you deserve that. You earned it. But you really have to work hard at that.
Yeah. Bobby, you reminded me of a couple of things. Thank you. One is that I try and be in tune to what the individual is talking about on an ongoing basis and respond, sometimes privately, sometimes publicly. And when I say respond, let's say a person says, I don't think the budget process is transparent enough. Well, do something different with the budget process to make it more transparent, and you know, address the direct concern. In general, I think to Bobby's point, it's all a matter of building trust. What I learned many moons ago is that so much of an individual's decision making is based on emotion and not fact, not, you know, facts on the ground or pragmatism or whatnot. And I work as hard as I can to find areas of commonality, and I work through those areas first to get the person to understand that, hey, there are some similarities between us. We have some shared interests, and that alone is enough to raise, you know, my trust level in their eyes a little. They might be a little more open-minded to hearing about some of the other things that I want to talk to them about.
You know, the two of you have just touched on something that I think is huge, and that is you have to work at it. You just don't come in, I think, and we talk about academics or someone maybe who may be listening in on this webinar and not that familiar with, well, they've never sat in your seat. And they understand the council manager form of government and the responsibilities and who's supposed to do what and who's not supposed to do certain things. But they may not have a good understanding of what you guys have covered, and that is you have to work at it. There was a former manager in Kissimmee by the name of Mark Durbin, and I never forgot, he said to me one time that if he had to list the responsibilities that he had as a city manager, the one that took the most time for him was working with his elected officials. He wanted to make sure that he was available to them. They were not an inconvenience. And I think if people in this profession, if they get real busy, which you all are, very, very busy, sometimes you think, well, golly, here comes the elected official. It's an inconvenience. And he didn't seem to ever see that to be the case. He thought that was his primary job, to work with them. And sounds like you two have just reinforced how important that is.
I think we're of the same mind on that, but you're touching on something that I mentioned earlier. When you talk about that accessibility, and I talked about reasonably accessible, it's critically important, given, as you said, Bob, how busy we are, that we also have the appropriate work-life balance. And accessibility, you know, the elected officials don't just limit their outreach to you during the workday. It's nights and weekends. And sometimes, you know, they're invading time which is, you know, precious with you and your family. And you know, I have learned how to establish some reasonable boundaries that, you know, this is my family time or this is my bedtime, you know, you know, over time, those are respected. And that's really important for you to be a healthy, whole individual so that you can be the best manager that you can be, and then responsive in the way that we've been talking about with everything else.
Very good point. Bobby, any other thoughts on that?
You know, I was reminded of, you know, the mayor or any commissioner. Let's just say that there's that situation in which the law enforcement's got their helicopter flying up over their subdivision at 9 o'clock. You know who they're calling in that subdivision? They're calling the mayor. And if you've got that relationship with your staff that your chief or whatever is happening gives you that call as manager, pick up the phone and call your elected official or elected officials if you feel like it's important enough to call all of them. And eventually you'll either get that test of, you don't need to call me. You could have called me tomorrow morning or whatever it is. But the other side of that is you're building that trust, you're building that respect. You think enough of them as your elected officials that you're calling them at 9:30 to suggest that everything's okay. They're looking for someone or whatever the issue is.
And just one final point, it's a nuance to what I talked about, and Bobby always gets me thinking with what he says, is that establishing boundaries is important, but you always have to be available for emergencies. That's part of your job. And, you know, it could be that 3 o'clock in the morning phone call. And yeah, you have to take it, you have to be there, and you have to do the outreach that Bobby's talking about.
Very good points. We have another question that's come in, so I'm going to go ahead and read that. Again, you guys are doing great. And a couple prepared questions that we had, don't worry about it. You know what they are. You'll just incorporate those in your responses. I'm loving the fact that we're just winging it here. First question, or the next question is as follows. Can you share your thoughts on the practice of some managers who, quote, count the votes, unquote, in what policies, programs to implement and to keep their job? Is this approach effective? What are the pitfalls, if any?
I think managers find themselves always being good vote counters. And if you've got that relationship built with your elected officials, you know, before you go into a budget or before you go into a project presentation, if you've done your homework, you've done your analysis, you've tried to win the votes before you go into a vote. And at the same time, as to where I remember a manager telling me that he had a 2-1, 1-1 commission. And I had never heard that before. And I started studying and listening to some of their commission meetings, and you could really see that there were two that were in sync, possibly with the manager, and the other three were all over the map. And it was on numerous issues that it was that way. And I was always thinking as to where, when someone suggests counting votes, as to how difficult that would be if you tried to do that all the time and you had such a commission. So your best bet is to work to get them all, hope that they're all with you, and the votes will be there. And a lot of times, I've always said, let the commission kind of police themselves versus you trying to do that. You know, you can try to sell a project, sell an idea, but if you're sitting in that council room and the council persons are sitting up there and they're arguing for or against, they're setting policy. So let them have at it.
Alan?
So, and the critical word right there is policy. That's their role. You're managing. And I think it can be dangerous if you're counting votes all the time on policy and you're perceived as the one that is somehow driving that policy, which you're not supposed to be. They're supposed to be driving it. You have you provide counsel, and then you implement whatever their decision might be. But some managers will push in policy directions, count votes to do it, and can set themselves up for failure later on because they're perceived as the problem rather than the electeds who should be establishing that policy.
It's well put, Alan. I'll tell you, Bobby, you touched on something too about counting. You're trying to get all of them. And the advice that I give people always is, if you have a 5-member commission, count to 5. Never count to 3. I count to 5. I actually interviewed for a job once, 7 elected officials. And the vice mayor, I never forget, asked me in the interview, public interview, can you count to 4? And I said, well, I count to 7. And he said, no, I understand. And this was a divided council, by the way. They said, no, we just want to make sure you can count to 4. And I said, with a 7-member of council, I would always count to 7. And he actually got red-faced and couldn't quite grasp what I was trying to say. Eventually he did vote for me, and we had a good relationship. But I think that is sort of a cliche that even some of the elected officials feel is the way a manager operates. And I think, again, both of you talking about the importance of establishing trust and let them know who you are and how you treat them all the same, I think is really powerful. And that would eliminate their concerns that you're counting to 3 in this particular case. If it's 5, you never know, 3 months from now, one of those 3 may be on the other side politically. We've all seen that happen, where what was a 3-2 one way becomes a 3-2 another way. So, that's just self-preservation, if anything else. I don't see any other questions. Why don't we go to the next question? Next slide. This is a really good one. What advice can you share regarding the elected board's relationship with the senior staff in this effort to build a manager-board relations? And I think, Alan, you have the lead on this one.
All right. This question is interesting because it speaks to the balance between information access for the elected officials and the potential for interference in organizational dynamics or operations. Most charters that I've seen give the elected officials the ability to ask questions, to seek information about the ongoing operations without, of course, interfering. And most charters I've seen down here have non-interference clauses as well. So some of it, I think, depends on, so what we're talking about here is, are you comfortable allowing your elected officials to reach out directly to, your department heads? So my question to you, and when I say you, anybody who's thinking about this, is what is your perception of their ability to navigate the politics within your community or your governmental structure? And what's the desirability of even having them engaging in those? In some places it's not a big deal, but in others it's a minefield no matter where you go, and you're better off leading through those minefields rather than have somebody else do so and stepping on a mine and making your job that much more difficult. I think you can teach staff to some extent how to be better navigators of that, but the nature of their jobs by and large is different, and it's part of your job to understand the politics and to navigate the politics. The only other thing I'd add to this is I think it's important to be aware of relationships that exist, long-term relationships typically, between staff and elected officials. Oftentimes, someone might get elected, they've known a city, employee for decades. Could be a department head, could be someone below or whatnot. And it's important to be aware of that. Some managers might think, oh, this is an opportunity to leverage it. I can talk to this employee and have them transmit information, but be mindful that the elected official might be doing the same thing to you through that same employee. It can go both ways, and it really just speaks to, one of my policies with when I've had staffs that I'm overseeing is to say, we never speak ill of our elected officials. Okay, we work for them, they're our bosses. You can think what you like, but in this venue, we do not speak ill, and I think that keeps you out of a lot of trouble. Bobby?
Alan, you've hit it over the park. The balance of that engagement is just so important, and it works probably best with that level of trust and respect, not only of your elected officials, but also that level of trust and respect that you have with your senior staff. Yeah, there's a lot of times you don't want to necessarily be bothered, and it's not a big deal that Commissioner, she called your department director and got directions to something, and it's just, don't worry about it. But it's also good, I think, as you're trying to do your job as manager and building that trust and that respect of your bosses, to share that expertise that you've got beneath you on your team. Let the elected officials see the professionalism of your department directors on this issue or that issue. Now, you need to know as manager basically all the answers, but share that expertise with them that you've got on your team and on your staff. I also think it's important that one of the things that I would always try to do is to, through coaching and the like, get your team to understand your job. A lot of times, they just answer to you. It's very important for them to realize that you answer to 5 or 7. How do you do that? Introduce them to the council manager form of government. Introduce them to the ICMA Code of Ethics. Let them know what drives you. And then as an organization, you pull it all together to try to make it better governance for the entire community. And Alan, you mentioned the comment about letting them, that balance of communications between, you don't need to be bothered by all of that. And it actually could be a negative management style if you're trying to hoard all the information anyway. But you don't want to come across that way. You want to become across as being that professional, the head of a team that is professional as a team.
Bobby, I'd like to acknowledge on this particular question that this is not a one-size-fits-all response that we can provide. Smaller communities are very different than larger communities, larger organizations. I think the larger the community and the larger the organization, the more removed the elected officials are from the employees, from the day-to-day. And conversely, in very small communities, and we have plenty of them, you have to expect that there are long-standing relationships and a lot more interface going on, and you just need to be aware of that.
And if it's informational, that's one thing. If it's policy, you also want your senior team and your staff to get back with you as manager to suggest, I had Commissioner A or B give me a call today and they were asking about that. And then there's nothing wrong with you getting back with that elected official, maybe even with that department director or that senior staff, to come together as a team to suggest, let's make sure that you got the answer that you needed. Is there anything else that we could help you with?
Yeah, I like that. Just as you establish that relationship with your elected officials to show that you're being equitable and fair with all of them. If they understand that you have staff that support you, that have that same transparent equitable philosophy as a team, so
Yes.
that no single elected official is going to try to manipulate that. They're immediately going to go to the manager, and they will be sensitized to what is more political versus others. These directors may not necessarily be trained and experienced politically, but I think if you work with them like you work with your elected officials, I think that certainly sounds like that would be a great help. Gentlemen, we have another question that's come in, but Alan, I'm going to let you respond.
I neglected to share one other thing that I have done because we have to recognize that the electeds are not going to limit themselves to reaching to your department heads. They might be talking to a frontline, service worker that they interact with at the park or wherever else. And so what I like to tell all of our staff, in places again that I'm managing, is that it's highly unlikely that you're ever going to interact with an elected, but it could happen. And if it does, and you get a question, if you don't fake an answer, don't feel like you have to answer, and if you do know the answer, share your knowledge, but immediately notify your supervisor that the interaction took place, share with them the question and share what you said, so that can work its way up to the management suite. And the rationale that I explained to the employees and resonates with them is that oftentimes an elected will ask a couple individual employees a question. They're only answering it from their perspective, and they don't have the global perspective. The elected then comes to a meeting and says, why are we doing X, Y, and Z? And you're placed in the position of having to gently correct them and say, well, Commissioner, actually, that's not all that we're doing. We're also doing A, B, C, D, and E. And by being informed of that interaction, it gives us in the management suite the opportunity to reach out to the elected officials, say, hey, we understand you were asking about this. What are you trying to understand, so that we can provide you with additional information so that you have a comprehensive perspective on what you're asking about. And that saves embarrassment for your elected, and it also ensures that you're more on top of those potential communications that could go on.
And Alan,
Alan, we have two other questions that's come in. Do you mind if we go ahead and address those? Because I think this one you could spend a lot of time on.
I don't like cutting Bobby off.
Yeah. I don't either, either one of you. But the first question of the two is, I am curious about how you handle situations in which you have already taken some action as the manager, and council members are unhappy with your past behavior. How did you defend your decisions and/or bridge the divide moving forward?
I'm not certain of the past behavior, but a lot of times as to where I've always tried to explain the decisions that I've had to make as manager to all of the elected officials through analysis at agenda meetings, with agenda reviews, with memos or phone calls to all of them, but you try to make it as simplistic and elementary as you can. Why did I do what I did? Given the circumstances that are there, you just don't leave it up as the circumstances. You explain the circumstances. And given that, I'd make the decision again if it's questioned.
Great response. Alan?
I'll take a little different tact on it, and I think some of how I respond depends on the relationship that I have with the city attorney.
Certainly.
Because some will be objective and some will be leaning much more towards supporting the electeds and not you. And that's important because the type of situation that you're talking about speaks to operational interference. They're questioning particular operational decisions that you made, whether it be not necessarily budgeting, because they get to vote on the budget, but maybe how you implemented a certain policy or a personnel decision that you've made. I'll try and go one-on-one with the individual when I can. When I'm called out publicly, I'll do my best to explain. Sometimes you can't. And I know in one situation, there was a personnel decision that a number of them were not happy with. And I was kind of implicitly asked whether or not I'd be willing to throw the employee under the bus to save my job. And I said, no. I said, that goes against my professional ethics. And, you know, I'm working with this employee and I believe we're heading in the right direction. And it ended up leading to me negotiating, you know, a separation agreement, because they just weren't happy. And sometimes that's what you have to do if you're going to stick with the code.
Great point. I think if you would have done that, it could have still backfired on you and you would have impacted your own personal brand, Alan. So I think obviously the right decision. I'm going to give each of you gentlemen about 30 seconds to summarize key points from today. We only have a few minutes left, but before we do that, I would like to address the final question that I see it's been posed by one of our attendees. The question is, what is your best or worst experience in having to educate or remind an elected official about the boundaries in their interaction between them and your staff? Your best or your worst experience? Now, you may have covered that, but in case you haven't.
Having someone come in, one of your elected officials come in your office and suggest that this is the way that they want it to be done, and you having to just bluntly say you need to go, we were talking about counting votes, you need to bring it before the commission in a public meeting and let's see what the balance of the commission wants to do with your suggestion.
Yeah, in my situation, and it's related to the situation I had just shared with you, I had one particular commissioner that was just really on me about this particular situation and talked to me privately about it first and wanted me to take action and fire somebody, and I didn't feel it was warranted. And they said, listen, they said to me, I'm gonna give you one chance, and if you don't take it, then you know you're gonna get fired. And I'm like, and so then when we were at the board meeting, it was funny, actually, you know, they said, well, I gave him a chance, and I told him he's fired if you know he doesn't do something. And the others looked at him like, who are you? And you know, you don't have that right. It's all of us that talk about it or make that decision. In the end, I still left.
If you can ever get the council to police themselves, you've done well, because that's exactly what you try to do. And in my case, the commissioner never brought up the policy or the issue publicly because they didn't.
Well, and one of the things that you both sort of been consistent today is you talk with the commissioner, you explain, and I think Bobby, you used in your last comments in simple terms, explanations if they have some difference with your issue. You don't take the position, I'm the manager, you're out of your lane, that's my responsibility. Those types of responses, I think, get managers in trouble. I haven't heard anything like that from you two. You two understand diplomacy, but not only that, but education and explanation. And that does make a difference. As Alan, you said something earlier about everything is emotional with a lot of these decisions. And so if you keep the emotions where it's respected, which is what you both have said, I think that makes a huge, huge difference. I'm going to ask each of you this time, doesn't matter which one goes first, if you take about 30 seconds, or maybe, let's see how much time we have. Yeah, take about 30 seconds apiece. If you can think about a few key points that you'd like to have our attendees take away from today of what you said.
My 2 points, I think, would be the mistakes that we spoke of, is to, you know, to keep all of your commissioners on a level playing field as far as your information and the like that you give to them, the dissemination of that. Don't play favorites, that'll catch up with you. And then the other point of that is to where if you meet that challenging commissioner, work hard at it, work even harder at it, and don't give up at that. And if you even get close, you've already done your job with the other balance of the commission to get what you want.
Thanks, Bobby. Alan?
You know, Bobby, you always inspire me, and it's no surprise you received a Lifetime Achievement Award. So I'm delighted to be serving with you on this. I think we've both touched on it. Communication is key. I'd almost be tempted to say, you know, it's one of those things that you can never have too much of, except maybe when you're starting to develop something and you don't want to, you know, jump the process too much. But communicate clearly, communicate often, communicate equitably, and you'll have better relations with your elected body.
Alan, Bobby, thank you so much. I don't think we could have had a better team. Both prior elected officials, one long-serving manager and one community in more of a, not really rural, but certainly not a Broward County, which is very urbanized. So you both come with different cultures and perspectives, but you were aligned on a lot of very, very key points. So we thank you for taking the time to prepare for today, as well as presenting today. And just for the attendees, before you adjourn, if you don't mind, when we adjourn this webinar, we'd like to ask you to take a very, very brief evaluation of today's webinar. And finally, I just want to thank the FCCMA board for continuing to provide these no-cost training segments for the attendees. And of course, thank you, the attendees, for your participation today. I'm sorry, there's one other commercial I need to do and I forgot about it. I did agree that University of Central Florida and University of Miami, they are doing a study, two professors, one David Mitchell at UCF and the other Jennifer Connolly at the University of Miami, are doing research on how city council members and city managers communicate and hold each other accountable. Their research seeks to better understand informal ways council members work with and guide city managers, vice versa. If anyone is interested in being interviewed by one of these individuals, I'm going to refer you to Professor Jennifer Connolly, and her email is jmc185@miami.edu. So that's jmc185@miami.edu. Glad I didn't forget that because I promised I'd bring it up.
Hey, Bob, thank you. On behalf of Bobby and myself, thank you for doing a great job facilitating today.
You're
Certainly,
welcome.
thank you.
My pleasure. With that, we're now adjourned.